Pablo Escobar, John Gotti, and El Chapo. Haunting similarities. The story of the rise of an infamous criminal looks familiar too often. Three criminals who reached the heights of greatness in the underworld demonstrated similarities that cannot be ignored. These men brought some immeasurables to the table that separated them from their peers, and they compelled their will upon the less strong. Pablo Escobar, John Gotti, and El Chapo Guzman were gangsters who rose above gangsters, shaking up the underworld in ways that manifested to the world. Pablo Escobar, John Gotti, and El Chapo were gangsters par excellence. To qualify as par excellence, a gangster has to rise to the level of gangster above gangsters, using influence, violence, all necessary means. So strictly speaking, Sammy the Bull and Michael Franzese were gangsters, even though they were not gangsters par excellence, because they never rose to the pinnacle of their borgadas. The Ochoa brothers, Jorge Ochoa, Juan David Ochoa, and Fabio Ochoa, were not gangsters par excellence because they lacked the abilities to rise to the very top. But they were gangsters, strictly speaking. Pablo Escobar, John Gotti, and El Chapo were men who rose above men in a dangerous game of life or death. The starting point. All three gangsters became young punks who dropped out of school to pursue their life of crime from humble beginnings. John Gotti had 8 siblings, and he often wore hand-me-down clothes that schoolmates clowned him about. This made the mafia attractive to him as a young man because it offered him a way out of his poverty. He soon became a street punk, but whose sight was really set on La Cosa Nostra. El Chapo sold oranges as a youth to help put food on the table in his large family. He later worked as a farmhand before quickly realizing he could 10x his income selling marijuana. The drug cartel would soon come calling. Pablo Escobar dropped out of high school at age 15 because he found it profitable to sell marijuana, opening the door to his destiny with the Medellin cartel. Each one of these gangsters entered the pathway to a life of crime in organizations that nurtured their growth and where brutality was the currency. In every case, law enforcement would play a pivotal role in the outcomes of these three gangsters. Rise to the top. Crime syndicates attract the worst elements of society and are therefore filled with notorious killers and outlaws. This was the reality of all of these three gangsters: John Gotti, Pablo Escobar, and El Chapo. John Gotti rose through the ranks of the Gambino crime family under the tutelage of Carmine Fadigo, his early captain. Gotti matured into a notorious gangster during that time, a period that saw him commit murder in the name of La Cosa Nostra and the Gambino crime family, the biggest of the 5 crime families at that time. John Gotti rose to become the head of a crew of Bergen Hunt and Fish Club in Ozone Park, Queens. He built fierce loyalty in the men under him that spread into the family as a whole. His crew engaged in activities from narcotics distribution and sale to homicide at the word of the boss. At a crucial time in the history of the Gambino crime family, the crime boss, Big Paul Castellano, demanded a copy of FBI surveillance tapes of members of Gotti's crew. You see, Big Paul had banned drug trafficking because it brought stiff prison sentences, and this resulted in pressure for the mafioso to cooperate with the cops and eventually give up other gangsters. John Gotti realized that these tapes could seal his doom with the boss, and this doom could include death because they had defied the boss Using the underboss of the Gambino crime family at the time, Neil Delacroce, they stalled the transfer of the tapes to Big Paul. But Neil was suffering from cancer and would soon die, and eventually the tapes would have to be given to Big Paul. John Gotti saw the writing on the wall, and he devised a plan to whack the boss before the boss would whack him. John had the gall to assemble a secret quorum of Gambino gangsters with backers such as Frankie the Chico and Sammy the Bull to plan an assassination of Big Paul. The risk was that of Big Paul finding out about the plot, which would result in all these gangsters being whacked. But on the late evening of December 16, 2005, a select team of shooters staked out the arrival of Big Paul at Sparks Steakhouse in the heart of New York City. This became the assassination heard around the world, and it marked a watershed moment in modern gangland history. And it rocketed John Gotti to the top of the Gambino crime family in spectacular fashion. Pablo Escobar got his start in the cartel by becoming a runner for a drug lab in Medellin. He would fetch coca from farms around Medellin, and he would transport them to the drug lab. It wasn't too long before Pablo was buying his own coca leaves and turning them to paste and eventually cocaine. Pablo's rise to the top was also aided by his ability to see the possibilities of mass transport of his cocaine to the United States. The brutal gangster was willing to partner strategically with people who greased the paths of his distribution network. He joined up with the three Ochoa brothers, who had established cocaine operations of their own to form the Medellin cartel. And so at the age of 26, Pablo was the boss. El Chapo went from selling oranges to selling marijuana, and this opened the door for his joining a cartel in his home state of Sinaloa. He worked under cartel boss Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, also known as El Padrino. Then later under the Sinaloa cartel boss Hector El Guaro Palma. This brutal boss took a liking to El Chapo because of El Chapo's willingness to use brutal force, as well as his acumen for delivering supplies without glitches. El Chapo's meteoric rise to the top of the Sinaloa cartel occurred when the boss, Mr. Palma, was arrested and sent to prison, creating a power vacuum that resulted in a violent struggle for the top. El Chapo rose to the top of the Sinaloa cartel, and he orchestrated the massive production, transport, and distribution of cocaine, meth, marijuana, and heroin to the United States. Now let's talk about wealth. In 2013, Forbes magazine ranked El Chapo as the 67th richest person in the world based on estimates of his narcotics operations. Forbes said the operation was estimated to earn a conservative average of $3 billion per year, and it had captured at least 25% of the narcotics market in the United States. Pablo Escobar made the Forbes magazine list of international billionaires from 1987 to 1993. Pablo was nicknamed the King of Cocaine, and he became one of the world's richest men as his business pulled in an estimated $420 million a week in revenue. Escobar's wealth was estimated at $30 billion at that time. In 1989, he was ranked as the 7th richest man in the world. John Gotti operated the reins of the powerful Gambino crime family from 1985 until his imprisonment in 1992. The Borgata controlled countless rackets and schemes, and this brought untold wealth to the boss in the form of cash envelopes. Since Gotti died in 2002, it is impossible to really quantify his entire wealth, but a recent survey of wealthy gangsters by Wealthy Gorillas estimated his worth at an estimated $30 million, making him the 9th richest criminal in the world in 2022. John Gotti celebrated his celebrity as the mob boss of the Gambino crime family. He wore custom suits, frequented the most upscale clubs in New York, and he often signed autographs for admirers. Gotti's celebrity exploded when he embraced the name the Teflon Don, as he successfully fought off racketeering charges brought against him by federal prosecutors. El Chapo sought fame and celebrity as well. El Chapo met with actors Sean Penn and Kate Del Castillo in October 2015 at an undisclosed location for an interview and get acquainted session. The session resulted in a Rolling Stone article by Sean Penn that brought a spotlight to the most wanted man in the world. Some argue that the celebrity status helped to bring down the Sinaloa cartel boss. Pablo Escobar sought and was elected to membership in the Colombian Congress from Medellin. The cartel leader was especially focused on the extradition treaty with the United States, and he wanted to kill it. The politicking brought tremendous spotlight to the cartel boss, as well as his fights with presidential figures over the years. Motivation. John Gotti's motivation was to avoid the death grip of boss Big Paul Castellano at first. But after the murder of Big Paul and Gotti's ascension to the throne of the Gambino crime family, the motivation became less clear. He ordered the whacking of Louis DeBono and others, but some of those hits felt like personal vendettas rather than a part of a bigger strategy for the Borgata. It was also apparent that the Anthony Gaspipe Casso was eliminating the circle around John Gotti one by one. But the response to it remains unclear to this day. John definitely became wealthy, but I cannot find evidence of a clear, focused motivation for the Gambino crime family after the hit on Big Paul. Pablo Escobar focused on a major objective: to kill Colombia's extradition treaty with the United States. This motivation saw him run as a candidate in the Colombian Congress in his effort to defeat the measure. Pablo was afraid of being imprisoned in the United States. He often said, "I would rather a grave in Colombia than a cell in the United States." He bombed a passenger jetliner in mid-air that he thought a presidential candidate was traveling in because Pablo felt threatened by this candidate's position of favoring the extradition treaty with the United States. Pablo Escobar entrenched in this position, and he died fighting for this motivation. Surveillance. Pablo Escobar, John Gotti, and El Chapo were affected by surveillance carried out by law enforcement agencies. FBI Gambino family squad leader Bruce Mao oversaw the surveillance systems that brought down John Gotti. The key evidence came from surveillance of the phone of Miss Nettie Sorelli, who lived in a second-floor apartment above the Ravenite Social Club, which was the main headquarters of the Gambinos. While Miss Sorelli traveled out of town on the Thanksgiving weekend of 1989, the FBI placed bugs in her apartment. The agents had been informed by a snitch that Gotti would leave the Ravenite through a back door, and he would go upstairs to the apartment to talk with his captains on the phone. These recordings played the key role in the demise of the Teflon Don. Pablo Escobar used cell phones to communicate with his family while evading the massive dragnet assembled to capture or kill him. His location was identified to a building that was stormed on December 2nd, 1993 by a massive law enforcement team. Escobar scrambled to the top of the building to evade being captured, and he attempted to hop from one rooftop to another while engaging in a shootout with the police. He was hit in the leg, torso, and head by bullets from the Colombian police. El Chapo opened himself to intense surveillance after he invited Sean Penn to his hideout in the remote mountains of Sinaloa. This intense surveillance eventually led to his location and capture in the town of Los Mochis in the state of Sinaloa on January 8, 2016. This was the final capture after 2 prison escapes that embarrassed the government of Mexico. In the end, All three of these gangsters' fate were determined by the law. John Gotti was sentenced to life in prison and served time in a maximum security prison, where he eventually developed throat cancer and he passed away in 2002. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery in New York. Pablo Escobar went out in a blaze of gunfire from the police on December 2nd, 1993. He was evading the police while engaging in a firefight, and he lost that battle. He was buried in the peaceful Cementerio Jardines Montesacro, just south of Medellin. El Chapo's life continues in the hands of the law. He was convicted in February 2019 of drug trafficking, conspiracy, kidnapping, murder, and other charges in New York after being extradited to the United States. Guzman was sentenced in July 2019 to life behind bars, and he is serving his time at the United States Penitentiary near Florence, Colorado, a supermax facility designed for the most dangerous inmates. Thank you.